Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sukalis, who is drinking out of a very fitting mug as we record this
So,
great
Tide Hoops.
Tide Hoops mug. Tide Hoops show is what we're starting with here on this Monday or Tuesday when you're listening to this. Alabama basketball, of course, if you were living under a rock and didn't see, won their first SEC game of the season, won their first game of the new year, and beat one of the newcomers of the SEC, Oklahoma, in pretty dominating fashion, 107-79. The Tide hand the Sooners their first loss, proving why it is in fact smart probably to play a road game before you start conference play, because Oklahoma did not do that and was absolutely burned away from home in front of a bunch of loyal Coleman Coliseum faithful. Tony, this was a great performance for Alabama to start out conference play, and I want to start with the man who has put in plenty of great performances for Alabama, who I think kind of epitomized this scoring blitz for Alabama. Mark Sears led the team in scoring, 22 points against the Sooners, and led Alabama in assists with 10. It was actually a career high for the Ohio transfer, a double-double.
The rare,
Yeah,
points assist double, which doesn't happen very much in college.
It does not. And it happened for Mark Sears. It was as close to a flawless performance as you could get from him. He was plus 25 in 32 minutes, and crucially, no turnovers as well. And I felt like that performance embodied Alabama's kind of dominance in Oklahoma on Saturday. What did you make of Sears? And obviously, Nato, it's very excited after the game, particularly about the playmaking stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the 10 assists were a career high for Mark Sears. It's crazy, because he's such a good player. I think that speaks to how hard it is to get 10 assists in a college basketball game. I mean, it's just, you only have 40 minutes to do so. Not everyone's quite the shooter they are in the NBA. You have bigger shot clocks. So, I mean, it's just tougher to get 10 assists in a game. So that was pretty cool. I think even more important than the 10 assists or the no turnovers. You had 22 points, 10 assists, and no turnovers. Also, LeBaron Philon, I think he had 15 and 5 and five rebounds, and then also no turnovers. So, that's huge. I think that you do that. Shoot, I mean, if those two guards continue to play like that, like they did against Oklahoma, now we'll get to Oklahoma maybe later. They're not necessarily the team that they were in the rankings, but if Alabama plays like that, I think that they're a contender to win the SEC. I mean, that is the Mark Sears that you're expecting. He still is not shooting lights out from three, but if he's going to distribute the ball like that, Alabama can beat you in other ways. We saw how dominant they were in the paint against Oklahoma. So it's not a live by the three, die by the three team, like I think some people would lead you to believe. So I'm really encouraged with Mark Sears, especially if he's going to spread the ball like that. Get the ball to Cliff. It was a big game for Cliff as well, and I think part of that is just Mark's ability to spread the ball around. So you got to be really encouraged with him. You had your positional or your roster rankings, and of course, I don't know if we're ever going to see Mark relinquish that top spot. This is a weekly thing. But he's definitely, I mean, if there was a point system, he's definitely leading by a lot of points right now.
Yeah, he put in a great performance. I think he's kind of sneakily getting back to those All-American numbers, and it feels hard to say that, like you said, because of the lackluster three-point shooting. But I think that creates another good conversation point about Alabama in general, is this team is absolutely still torching teams without hitting threes. And Oklahoma coach Porter Moser said a really good thing about that, is the problem is, not that they're hitting them, but it's that they have so many players who are just a threat, which creates so much opportunities to space the floor, which in turn creates opportunities to drive the lane. And when you have a guy like Mark Sears who attacks different coverages really well and can get to the rim as well as he does, having that kind of spacing on top of that makes it so much more difficult to defend, which is, I think, why you're still seeing Mark score this much without, with only hitting 1-3, and why you're seeing Alabama score 91 points a game and lead the country despite, they haven't found the 3-point groove yet.
Yeah, and I think, this is just, I mean, we can talk about this every single week, basically, but Alabama's depth is such a key thing, because this was not a game that you had to shoot threes. I mean, Oklahoma was giving you the paint, so you take it. I mean, that's the misconception, is that, yes, Nato likes to shoot threes, but he much rather get points in the paint, get the easier 2-point shots. He doesn't want those mid-range shots, but he wants points close to the basket. And Alabama was getting those. So if teams are going to give that, then Nate Oats would much rather be a team that he'd much rather have a team that can get to the paint, get to the bucket, and score. I think the great thing about this team is, now granted he was coming back from an illness, but like Houston Millett didn't play, and this was not a game that he had to play. But like, let's say it was a 3-point game where you talked about having those options. All of a sudden, like you could switch in, and maybe Houston Millett plays a lot more than Darian Reed or Jaren Stevenson, and you go for that 3-point option. This is a game that you needed more muscle, so you had more minutes from like a Darian Reed. So I think that there's just flexibility that you can do on this roster that allows you to kind of mix and mold. I think after every game, there's always going to be like and we could have been better for aspect from Alabama. It's like, oh, they did this and Alabama could have been better because they didn't play Houston Millett, or, oh, Alabama didn't, they had someone coming off of an injury, but they didn't have to use him, or, this wasn't a big Cliff game, but, they were able to score. Yeah. So, I think there's other things too. It's not just the depth. I mean, I think you got guys like Chris Youngblood. He's slowly coming into his own. I don't remember what he shot against Oklahoma. He still hasn't really been the lights out shooter that you would think. Yeah, he was 1 of 5, but I think he's a guy that Nate Oats talks about those players. Like, you just put your head down, you do the blue collar stuff, the shots will fall. Youngblood had 9 points, 8 rebounds for a guard. That's pretty good. I think he'll start hitting those threes. You got guys like Aiden Holloway. So yeah, having those options on the threes, the 3-point range kind of opens things up. And I do think the shots will eventually start falling, but Alabama can do some things to kind of even put more 3-point shooters onto the court and, and maybe spark that offense a little bit more. But yeah, things are super positive. There's a lot of different avenues you can talk about of like encouragement from Alabama. This is one of their best performances of the year. That being said, I kind of think we might look back at this and say, wow, this Oklahoma team wasn't as good as we thought it was. But at the moment, I think you should really appreciate it. And I think it's a great way to start SEC play.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to start SEC play. And you mentioned, other things that give indications you can win the whole thing, or at least win the regular season, is 9 turnovers as a team. Like you mentioned, 0 between your guard tandem of Sears and Phylon. That will win you plenty of games if you can sustain that. Obviously, turnovers have been another problem this year as well. And you mentioned different avenues of scoring. You talked about Cliff. That was where I wanted to go next. And in Oklahoma, we talked about this. Not the best interior defense, but it's one thing to have that on paper and another thing for Alabama to take the advantage that they did. And I was really encouraged by how much Clifford Omouryi got involved. Still only played 17 minutes. I think it'll be interesting in more competitive games if that goes up and how much it goes up by. But 10 points, 7 rebounds, and a block. It was his first double-digit scoring performance since, I believe, the final of the Players Era tournament back at the end of November. So that was really promising, and he seemed just way more involved on the offensive end with, like you said, Mark Sears being able to feed him. Nelson had a really nice lob to him in transition that looked like all of his points were just super easy. They just came on kind of nice rim rolls where he was wide open. I was just super encouraged by, I think, Alabama's other players, getting him the ball, getting him some paint touches, and recognizing this game in particular, like you said, not every game will be a big Cliff game, but this game in particular could be one where he could be used more offensively, and they took advantage of that.
I think unless you're playing like an Auburn or a team with just an absolute elite big, I don't really know if you're going to play Cliff more than 20 minutes a game or more than 19 minutes a game. And that's fine. I think that's just kind of like, we've made it through 15 games or 14 games, and he hasn't really played that much, like in terms of, the 25, 28 minutes or anything like that. I don't think we're going to see that. I think that's fine. I think we talked about the depth. There's ways you can, filter people out. You've got guys that can provide muscle, whether it's Diabate or, you can put Grant Nelson as a small 5. So like, there's different ways to do it. I do like the way Cliff was used. And I think that, he can be very useful even in 18 minutes a game. And he's just one of those guys that I think, he presents something different. And I think there's so many aspects of this roster that you just present something different. And I think this is a good highlight of like what he could be. And there'll be times when, they do need him to step up. I think, there's some of those games against some of the better bigs in this conference. He definitely is going to have to be one of the key players, but if he's just kind of like a role playing big guy that will come up with big situations, that's also fine. And I think that he's going to have his part to play, and I'm encouraged by him as well.
Yeah, I could see Nate Oates kind of wanting to use him. I think how they wanted to use Muhammad Wagi last year, obviously he was hit pretty hard by the injury bug. Oates said pretty early on that he wasn't going to be able to play more than 15 minutes a game, and I think that kind of hampered him a little bit. Muhammad Wagi, of course, back in Coleman got his Final Four ring as well, as a little a side note to this game. But I think Cliff will be a guy going forward that's used kind of in spurts, like you said. He starts the game. I think he's a perfectly adequate player to start as a big, get yourself a little bit of a presence down there. But yeah, Alabama throws a different look, then puts him back in, when it deems necessary for kind of a 3 to 5 minute stint, then lets him sit. I think the fact that you're able to do that and he's not forced to play 25, 30 minutes like he probably was at Rutgers because of just how dominant they needed him to be, that says a lot to go back to it, like about Alabama's roster and a lot about what, Cliff can offer. But I think this offensive output that he had is definitely sustainable in the minutes that you saw him play. And I think that's encouraging. I think it's just going to be down to how well, the guards and the other players can get him the ball and get him the ball in good situations going forward against some of these better SEC defenses. And we'll obviously see, how it goes for him.
And with as fast as Alabama wants to play, I
Right.
mean, they're not going to be playing a half court, throw the ball into the big kind of offense. That's just not what they do. And so, if you're going to be moving as fast and have as many possessions as Alabama's going to have, like, you probably do want to get those bigger players fresher legs. I mean, like it's he's not a guard. I'm not saying he's unathletic at any means, but you want to keep those guys fresh throughout games, and just the demands on this team are different necessarily than the demands out of Rutgers,
Yeah.
and so I think that also plays part of it. You want to keep him fresh. You want to be able to capitalize on those moments when you need him instead of just having him on the court all the time.
I think it'll definitely be interesting to see how his role, kind of ebbs and flows as the season kind of goes on, particularly offensively. But it was absolutely a what you wanted out of Cliff game against Oklahoma. I'm switching to the other side of the ball too, another area where it's just said he wants to see a little bit more from Omouryi and other guys as well, because it was an excellent performance from Alabama's defense, but it wasn't perfect, at least by Oates' high standard. And I want to talk about that because obviously the assignment coming in, everyone knew, circled the name on their roster sheet, whatever you want to call it, was Oklahoma guard Jeremiah Fears, the talented freshman, has been their best player in non-conference play. And I think in Oates' eyes, 27 minutes of this game, Alabama absolutely neutralized him. He had 1 point through until the 11:40 mark in the second half, but then went on to score 15 points in that final sort of 10 minutes, 12 minutes stretch. Oklahoma in the first half was 0.78 points per possession. They were a 1.35 in the second half. So, Oates kind of talked about that. He was particularly frustrated and said he still wants to see, Alabama dialed in when it is up 28. Hold on to that lead. You don't necessarily have to keep pouring on the points offensively, but maintain that energy defensively. Overall, a great, outing defensively against Fears in particular, Tony. But what did you make of kind of Oates expressing his disappointment a little bit in maybe not completing the job in his eyes defensively?
Like, as a basketball coach, I feel like you have to do that, and like saying all the right things. And yes, it's probably something that Alabama has to look at. Like, they can't just turn it off. But I mean, come on, like, I never felt that Oklahoma was like anywhere. It wasn't like a case of like, oh wow, Oklahoma's made this a little bit of a basketball game. Like, yes, they let Fears, pad his stat sheet, but like, what's the closest I'd have to go back and look, but like, what's the closest they came within Alabama during that span? Like, it wasn't even 10 points, so it's like, I don't really care if I'm Alabama. Like, that's fine. Like, I mean, you don't say it's fine because it might not be fine in a different circumstance, and it is something that you kind of have to circle. But like, if we're going on like a color system, it is a yellow, not an orange or a red. Like, it is not something that like I'm worried about at all. It's I think that those are kind of meaningless points, and it's one of those things like you slap your players on the wrist. But I think if the game was close, I think they would have continued to play with more defensive intensity. I mean, it's also too, I mean, if you're trying to, filter in and get people in, you might not always be playing your stars as long if you're up by those points. And so, like, I think that probably changes the metrics. I mean, Alabama's roster is deep, so really there shouldn't be that much of a drop off. But I think all those things kind of factor in. I'm not worried about that at all. I get why Nato said it. I get that like Alabama does turn off at times. I think I'd be more concerned about like maybe slow starts they've had in the past, or periods during the game. If they would have done that midway through the first half and like really like let Oklahoma back into it and then poured it back on at the start of the second half, I would have been more concerned, because then you're doing poorly in meaningful minutes. But if you're just kind of turning off when you're up by 20, I think most teams do that. I mean, like, you don't want it to happen, but it just does. That's basketball. That's football. That's baseball. I mean, like literally every sport, when you're up by a lot, you kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit. You don't want to, but you do.
Yeah, I think it's just like you said, it's a habits thing that Oates wants to kind of nip in the butt early, because if you do that against an Auburn, I mean, you're going to be in big trouble. If you do that against a Tennessee, you're going to be in big trouble.
Like to play devil's advocate, if they do it against Auburn, I'm fine with it from an Alabama perspective, because if they have a 20-point lead against Auburn,
right,
then they're obviously doing something right. I don't think that they'll blow a 20-point lead against Auburn. I can say that and not have to worry about the ramifications of it, because they will not have a 20-point lead against Auburn. But yeah, it's such a situation of like, yes, I guess if they if they went to sleep against an Auburn while the game was good, I think Auburn should punish them and put the game out of reach. Or
yeah, I think it's just a
game that they shouldn't be in.
Yeah, I think it's a perspective thing slightly. They might, in Alabama's eyes, you might see a 10 or 12-point lead against Auburn and your eyes go wide and you fall asleep at the wheel for even 5 minutes. A team like that's going to hurt you. A team like Tennessee's going to hurt you.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So I think it's just a habits thing, and it's you're right. It is more down to what a coach has to say, but and Alabama deserves their props for defending fears, particularly LeBaron Philon. I know Nate Oates ended his press conference by saying, LeBaron Philon was paying attention to kind of the NBA draft buzz that Fears was getting heading into the game, and said that was put a little chip on his shoulder, which I think is pretty encouraging for a freshman to, what do you call that? A reasonable drinking of the rat poison? I don't know if you put it in Nick Saban terms, but you let that use motivation.
That is what we call, see, Jack's new here. That is what Saban called yummy rat poison.
There we go.
So there's rat poison and there's yummy rat poison. That would be the yummy version.
The yummy version of rat poison. And LeBaron Philon continues to just be an absolute stud on both ends. Had 2 steals. And I liked Alabama's use. They kind of went with a variety of defenders against Fears. They put Darion Reed and even Jaron Stevenson on him at times to kind of give him a little bit more size to deal with. But they were absolutely hounding him. He looked really, really uncomfortable, when he crossed half court. Even Mark Sears was doing a good job on him at times, I noticed. So props to them. And obviously, yeah, I think it's just kind of a habits thing as we continue. This team can be so dominant, and it just is like you're right. It totally can get in your head to, kind of put your foot off the gas. But they picked a game in which it did not affect the outcome of the game. Certainly,
we're recording this on a Monday, and LeBaron Philon was just named the back-to-back, or he in consecutive weeks now. He's been back-to-back. I guess that's how back-to-back works, huh? But SEC Freshman of the Week. So yeah, he's no longer really a freshman anymore. He's playing at a very consistent level. And the thing about LeBaron Philon too is it's not just against this Oklahoma team. He's done well pretty much. He didn't have a good players era tournament. His numbers weren't good from that. But other than that, he's played good. He's played well at Purdue. He's played well at North Carolina. He played well against Creighton, I believe. All the big games, he's done really well. That's super encouraging. I thought he was going to be a 2-year player, and I didn't want to buy into the early, hype. He's gone after this year. He's an NBA player. I've bought in. Him and Darion Reed are both probably gone after this year. I do think he is an NBA player. He's got to get a shot a little bit better, but I don't think it's going to matter as much. I think an NBA team will see that and say, "Hey, we can fix his shot, or that will improve." He's got so much intangibles. Yeah,
I think the most intriguing thing from him and from an NBA standpoint is I think his shot will take a little bit longer, but I think the thing that can probably develop quicker right now is the stuff on the defensive side of the ball. If he can just continue to be an absolute pest for really good opposing guards like Fears, and obviously he's going to face a bunch more going forward. I think that's gonna be what separates him even further, or puts him even further into that kind of NBA category. Another guy who you've mentioned stepping up in all the big games, and most frankly the small ones for Alabama, that I do want to also give a shout out to, is Grant Nelson for his performance. 12 points, 11 rebounds. It's his third double-double in 4 games. He's comfortably leading Alabama on the boards. This was a monstrous performance for the Tide in the rebounding category. They're also one of the best teams in the country at that, and that is plenty thanks to Nelson. I mean, he is, to me, Tony, found kind of another level this year. I think a lot of people were a little disappointed at the end of last season. He was that preseason all SEC first teamer coming in, all this hype as one of the better transfers, guys out of the portal from North Dakota State. Underperformed a little bit, and then obviously the conference tournament raised his game. He's in this role alongside Omouryi, and he's just absolutely flourished, which maybe you could have seen coming, but I'm pretty impressed by the levels he's
I'm
hit.
a big Grant Nelson guy. He's not a totally perfect player. He doesn't play as good of a defense as some of the other guys, and I think that's one of the things that he'll have to work on. There are some blow-bys, and he's okay, but he's consistent on the offensive end. He's not always pretty. The threes look ugly, but he makes enough of them, and he makes some big ones too.
They've started going in a lot more recently as well.
As of if you look at bigs that are shooting, like compare him to like Jaren Stevenson. If my life was on the line for Jaren Stevenson, I'm like for Jaren Stevenson 3, I'm like writing my will. Grant Nelson, I'm kind of optimistic. I just feel like too, if it's a big shot, he's a guy that can make it. I think he comes through, and this I don't have data to back this up, and this might be kind of goofy, and I probably should, as a journalist, like look at this, but it seems like he comes through more in the clutch moments, or like when they really need him. Then I feel like he's a better shooter or a better scorer in those moments, and so I'm a big Grant Nelson guy. To me, he's the number 2 player on this team. And like when I think I told you that, and I like thought it was going to sound takey during the game when I told you it. It's just because he gets a lot of hate, but really it shouldn't be a take. Like Grant Nelson is the second best player on this team. And so I'm really high on him. The double doubles, the consistency on the offensive side. I think that's important for this team, and the way he can stretch the floor as a shooter. He's not great, but he's also not terrible either.
Yeah, it's been improving. He went 2 for 3, I believe, against Oklahoma, and I think it was 2 for 5 in the game prior against South Dakota State. I mean, I would take 2 for 5 from 3. Sorry, 2 for 5 against Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I'll take 2 for 5 in the SEC from Grant Nelson all day long. If he can add a pair of threes with his catapult-looking jumper, I'll take it any day of the week. And
I'll take 11 rebounds for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's been the most interesting part is, I think we thought in the offseason Omouryi would come in and kind of be this rebounding monster. And I think his presence has kind of instead just opened up the opportunity to let Nelson go get more boards, because Omouryi is just kind of occupying the other team's big, instead of Nelson having to contend with, maybe a big 4 and a center at the same time, because Alabama doesn't have as much front court depth to match last year. So yeah, it's been pretty great. And obviously we'll need to continue to see him find that level, or be at that level, if Alabama does indeed want to win this conference. So promising stuff from Mr. Nelson in the last couple of weeks. And we'll look ahead now, Tony, because obviously the grind is just getting started for Alabama in conference play. They've got 2 road games coming up here this week, starting, of course, on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central against South Carolina. A quick look at Alabama's resume. Hasn't changed too much. They're still 5th in the AP poll, which was released on Monday. Ken Pom has them as the 9th best team in the country with the number 4 offense and the number 44 defense. Went up a little bit after Oklahoma. Torvik, another analytics site, the number 7 team in the country with the number 4 offense and the number 34 defense. So Torvik likes their defense a little bit more. Still number 9 in the net, and still seen as a number 2 seed by Mr. Joe Lunardi, who I will probably be pivoting from when more people start making brackets. I don't know how much I trust him with his bracketology. That's another thing. But
this spring, like with those way too, like before they, or no, not this spring, like over the summer, like he had brackets that had like multiple. I feel like Auburn was listed twice. Like,
yes, there's a couple times that make you think he throws a dart at a wall.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, all right, buddy. Like, first of all, like, it's way too early to make these. Second of all, like, if you're gonna make them, like, don't start putting teams twice, so.
But we digress. So let's look ahead to South Carolina briefly, Tony. A quick rundown of their resume. They are 10-4. They lost their first SEC game by quite a bit, almost 40 points against Mississippi State. Their numbers were very poor. Mississippi State, a good defensive team, absolutely shut them down. Ken Pom has South Carolina ranked number 74 with the number 103rd offense and the 65th best defense. Torvik has them at 93. Couple of names on their team to know: Colin Murray Boyles. We talked about LeBaron Philon being an NBA draft guy. Murray Boyles, a sophomore forward, firmly an NBA draft guy, averaging about 15 and 9 and over a steal and a block per game. Jamari Thomas, their guards, their best passer, averaging about 12 and 3.5 assists. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention third leading scorer, Nick Pringle, 2 for 2 in games with former Alabama players for the Tide. Pringle averaging about what he did last year, honestly, 10 points and about 6.5 rebounds. They're one of their better rebounders. So, Tony, you hear all that. I kind of hear a sort of team that will probably be middling, if not probably in that bottom tier of the SEC when it's all said and done, given the strength of the conference. But what do you make of South Carolina and Alabama's chances on Wednesday evening?
I feel like this is a rare SEC team that I just don't think is going to make the tournament.
There are 13 of them, so yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of teams that I can say that I just don't see South Carolina being one of those teams. Which I think this is a great Alabama's schedule's very fortuitous because it's tough to go play in the SEC. I think you're arguably playing maybe the worst SEC team. Is that fair?
I would have them in LSU in my kind of bottom two at the moment.
I don't want to there's the worst SEC.
It could change.
The worst SEC team is not a bad that's better than a lot of teams, right? But
yep.
I think you're playing maybe one of the worst SEC teams, and then kind of getting that chance to play on the road in the SEC, ease into it, and we'll get to this, maybe the A&M game at a different time. But I think this is a nice get your feet wet on the road in the SEC before you have to go to College Station on the weekend. I think Alabama is going to roll in this game. I think that it's just going to be a matter of I don't want to say Alabama's playing themselves because it is an SEC game, but it's one of those things where if Alabama does what it's supposed to do, even if it has a poor shooting night or things don't have to be all clicking for Alabama to win this game. I think it's more of a case of they play the right way, they hustle, they come in focused. They should leave with a win. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think Carolina has a team to make it a little a little ugly. Maybe they've got some guys that can they can make the game ugly. They've got some players that can step up, but I don't think this is a nail biter for Alabama. I think that might come on the weekend, but I think Alabama should have a pretty easy road here.
Yeah, I agree with you where, South Carolina, this was a team that overperformed last year. Of course, was one of those, along with Alabama, one of those 13-5 teams that finished tied for second in the SEC after they were picked to finish last. So, I certainly don't count out Lamont Paris. I like him as a coach. And some guys will step up. Nick Pringle will certainly have a chip on his shoulder for this game. Pun absolutely intended there. Murray Boyles, another guy who can scrap, gets a lot of rebounds, is a decent rebounding team. Their defensive numbers are better than their offensive ones. So, if they can slow Alabama down and, like you said, kind of muck the game up, especially on the road, it's hard to win on the road anywhere in the SEC. But I do think it could get interesting. And this is one of those games when you go on the road the first time, you don't want to have that run if you're up 15 with 10 minutes left in the first half. If it gets that big that quickly, that's a game where you have to keep your foot on the gas, or a moment where you have to keep your foot on the gas and not afford to let South Carolina, make it a single digit game by halftime, because that will only give them, a team like that, confidence. They have a legit NBA guy in Murray Boyles, some good guard play. So, you like we said, you can't take your foot off the gas on this one, but I do see the Tide ultimately getting a comfortable win here.
I like your chip on the shoulder pun. It took me a while to get that because I don't really I know Pringles are a chip, but for anyone that didn't get that and whose brain works a little slower like mine, that was like that. I was like chip on the shoulder. What does that mean? It's oh, Pringles. That Pringles are a chip.
Pringles are
their own thing. I think I don't. Yeah. It's almost like I don't even view them. Yes, they are a chip, but like
it's because they come in a can and not a bag.
yeah.
It's different. I was an advocate staunchly for the Nick Pringle NIL deal that I do wish would have come to fruition. I guess it still could at South Carolina, but yeah, I think it'll be an interesting one, for Alabama, and it'll be another test. This team's looked, very good on the road. It's looked very bad on the road. So, it'll be kind of another litmus test there. They were very good in Carolina. One of the other Carolina on the road was their best performance. So maybe the Tide just likes the East Coast over there. But 6 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, the Tide taking on the 10-4 South Carolina Gamecocks, Tony. And there's some basketball. Let's finish with some football. We got a couple of news items to kind of dissect since we last recorded here. And, it was some good news for Alabama on the defensive side of the ball for football. 2 key returners, Tony, coming back in the last couple of days. Linebacker Deontay Lawson, a huge piece, captain, obviously, one of the captains for Alabama, productive linebacker. Injuries aside for him last year. And then Damani Jackson, the USC corner who transferred to Alabama last season, had a great year, locked down one of those starting spots. Both of them are coming back. And it's, 2 more names in a long list of key returners for Alabama. What did you make of those decisions for both of them to come back? And how excited now are you for this Tide defense with a bunch of key returners back next season?
Yeah, I was wondering where you were going to draw the line at 2, because that's really like what,
it's been more. Yeah.
5, right? I mean, you've got Jackson, Lawson. You've also got Justin Jefferson. You've got LT Overton. So I mean, like, yeah, they've got a lot of. I guess that's 4. I think Jamarian Latham's going to come back, so that will get us back up to 5. But I think that's super encouraging. I think this Kane Womack defense is going to be pretty special. I mean, look, this is one of the better defenses that they've had last year. Last season's defense is one of the better defenses they've had in a while. This year's this year, as in this upcoming season's defense, could be even better. I think that they've got some depth concerns, and if you look at the defensive tackle position, my 5th guy was Tim Keenan. I don't think I mentioned
yes.
him. But there you go. Yeah. I think you get Tim Keenan back. That's big. I think if you still have some depth concerns on the defensive line. I think getting Tim Keenan back was, I don't think anyone really expected him to leave, but he played that whole song and dance of maybe I'll leave. It's still good to have him back. James Smith was encouraging during the bowl game against Michigan. That being said, he's been very inconsistent. So I don't know if you are ready to rely on him as a starter. Maybe you are. I mean, he's definitely got the potential to be a starter. I'm excited about his potential, but maybe you get an experienced guy on the defense to push him. They've got Steve Mbua, or I can't say his name, but the kid.
I think it's Mbua, I believe.
I'm encouraged by him. I think he can be. But once again, you got a lot of guys at the defensive tackle position. Maybe that you might want to have another. It's just hard to get. It's hard to pull quality defensive tackles from the portal. If they're there, I think Alabama's going to make a play if they can. But that's an area I think you'd want to strengthen. You look at the inside linebackers. You've got Hill Green from Colorado. You've got Justin Jefferson now coming back. You've got Deontay Lawson. So you've got basically the same kind of situation you had. You lose Jahad Campbell, but you have Deontay Lawson and Justin Jefferson and Hill Green now. Nakai Hill Green. So I think that you still have 3 veterans, but they lost Justin Okoronkwo to the transfer portal. I know from sources that they're trying to get him back, but I mean, once you go into the portal, you saw Denny Lewis Jr. come back. You saw, I guess you can count Jalen Mbakwe coming back. I'm not sure if he actually officially went in, but more often than not, when you hit the portal, you leave. So if they lose Justin Okoronkwo, I think that's something where they're going to want to add another kind of experienced guy. There's not a lot of experience behind those 3 veteran guys that they have in the middle of their defense, and we saw what happens with injuries. Deontay Lawson was out, got injured in the Oklahoma game. I think they're probably going to try to do some stuff with Justin Jefferson. Maybe put him. They don't really have a set down guy at the Wolf position, so I think you may experiment with him at Wolf. Obviously, you got Quay Russell there. You'll have Jamarian Latham kind of play there, and when you want to get heavier on the field. But I do think you're going to need depth in the middle of the defense. So that's an area that I guess I would circle. But yeah, I'm super, super excited about this defense. Getting Damani Jackson back is key because now you got Sabian Brown, Damani Jackson, but then you brought in Cam Calhoun from Utah. Who's a guy that can play a bunch of positions and a guy that can kind of cycle in. It also kind of allows you to lose Jalen Mbakwe to the offensive side of the ball. And maybe, now you're less worried about having impact guys at the slot receiver position where you lost, Kobe Prentice. And, I think you're in better position there. And, you can kind of make that transition without worrying about losing the depth. And then they bring in, two Rivals 100 really, really good cornerbacks as well. And you're going to see one of those this weekend down in Texas. So I mean, they're I think they're in amazing shape.
Yeah, I'm really, really encouraged by the defense, especially the secondary. I mean, you go from last season, they talked about literally they didn't feel like they had enough bodies in that area of the field, and now you got Calhoun. Deshaun Jones is another guy who is really intriguing. Had college experience at Wake Forest, so yeah, the list goes on and on in terms of the defensive standpoint. But two huge returners in Lawson and Jackson. And then just your overall takeaway. You touched on it, a bunch there on the defensive side of the ball, but just overall, how are you feeling with where Alabama stands in the portal? We're obviously in the last kind of 48-hour window where the paperwork can be filed at the time of recording. So we'll see if there's any crazy major last minute entrances into the portal.
We're done. I mean,
we might be done.
I think. I mean, I know that we're in that paperwork period, but I'm pretty sure we're.
Yeah.
Alabama players enter or they're going to enter, like you hear about it. You don't have like sneaky paperwork at a school like Alabama. Like it gets reported.
Yeah.
So I think we're fine in terms of when I say fine, I think we're fine in terms of evaluating the roster as what it is. I don't think we're going to catch a curveball right now.
Yeah.
I do think that you might add some people. I mean, look, I think that the biggest add would be at the tackle spot, the offensive tackle spot, where you lost Elijah Pritchett. You have Wilkin Formby, and Wilkin Formby is a guy that Alabama really had to fight to keep. There were programs that were throwing some serious money at him, and I think Alabama, the fact that they kept him shows how much they believe in him, and I think he's probably goes into the spring as the leading candidate to fill Elijah Pritchett's spot at right tackle. Obviously, you have Caden Proctor at left tackle, Parker Brailsford returns at center, and you have Jaden Roberts returning at right guard. Those are your three set positions, but you kind of have to fill that left guard position and the right tackle position. I'd put Wilkin Formby. We'll have a story about this, a whole roster outlook tomorrow on the site, or Tuesday on the site. I have Wilkin Formby at that right tackle spot. I have Campbell. Was it William Carroll? Right,
Michael Carroll.
Michael Carroll. I get these names mixed up. You're the recruiting guy, I guess. That's a guy that I should know his name, and Alabama fans should quickly know his name as well. But Michael Carroll is a player I think can step in instantly at the guard spot. He's a bigger guy. He could also play tackle, but I kind of like him as an interior guy. Theoretically, let's say if it doesn't work out with Formby, I think he can probably play that right tackle role, and maybe you put Cam Dewberry, the Texas A&M transfer, at that guard spot. There's flexibility. I think you're also going to want to bring in a tackle if one of them pops up in the portal. Or ideally, you'd probably want to add another tackle, another goodish tackle. We'll see what happens with the playoff teams, and maybe it'll be done for departures. But I think with the playoff teams, you're going to see another portal opportunities. Maybe some of those guys leave. If Alabama can add a tackle from that bunch, you're going to need it because Caden Proctor is going to be fine for the fall, but he's undergoing surgery on an existing injury. We had reported about that. So he's probably going to be limited in the spring. So you've got Wilkin Formby. You're probably going to want another tackle there in the spring just to kind of see how things go. So yeah, I think that would be priority number one for me. If I'm Alabama, is adding another offensive tackle and someone that, like, even if he doesn't end up starting, someone that will push Wilkin Formby for that spot.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think help in the trenches seems like the biggest on both sides of the ball, seems like the biggest sort of need going forward for Alabama. But you know what, Tide fans, you made it through the departure period. It's finally closed, at least until April, in terms of all the guys that can leave. And, it was sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a mass exodus, but, you had a good amount of names leave, but you also have some really intriguing additions. And I think an exciting defense in particular coming back. So plenty to look forward to on the football front. Like Tony mentioned, we've got, plenty of recruiting coverage this coming week. I'll be in San Antonio for the Navy All-American Bowl. Looking forward to talking to Chuck McDonald, the corner, Caleb Edwards, the tight end, 2 signees playing in that game. Excited to hear from them and get to Alabama. There's recruits on campus already. So we'll have plenty of coverage of all of that. And on the recruiting front, as we get into the class of 2026, plenty of basketball stuff going forward as the Tide rolls into SEC play as well. And we get, gunning towards spring football. So a ton to subscribe on the site for. Subscribe here on the YouTube. Drop us a like on the video if you're watching. Follow us, give us a follow on Spotify if you're listening. And enjoy your week. Enjoy the South Carolina and A&M games, and we will see you next time.